In this section, we're going to explore two different options for deploying our backend server. The first option will Dockerize the server so it can be deployed to any cloud service, like Cloud Run, Kubernetes, Elastic Beanstalk, and many others. The nice thing about this is that it doesn't lock you into any one cloud service, so it makes your backend code very portable, meaning you can deploy it wherever you want to. Now, as an alternative to Docker, I'm also going to show you how to deploy this code to Firebase Cloud Functions in the next video. So I'd recommend watching both of these videos and weigh the pros and cons and decide which one makes the most sense for your project. The first option we'll look at is Docker, and you don't necessarily have to have Docker installed on your system to do this, but I would recommend installing Docker if at all possible. The install steps vary by system, but if you have it installed, you should have access to the Docker command in the command line. To Dockerize our node server, we first need to create a Docker file. Inside the Docker file, we'll start with a base container. In this case, it's the Node 10 container, which is a Linux container running Node.js version 10. I'm using Node 10 in this case because that's what also runs on Firebase Cloud Functions, but you're welcome to use a more modern version of Node if you prefer. Inside the container, we'll first set the working directory, and then we'll copy our package.json files into that directory. We can then run npm install to install our dependencies. After that, we need to set the Node environment to production. This is important because it tells Node not to use the values in our .env file. If you remember from very early on in the course, the .env file is only used for environment variables in development, not production. In a few minutes here, we'll set our production environment variables in Cloud Run directly. From there, we'll copy over the source code, and then we'll run npm run build to build our production code. And lastly, we run npm start to start the Express app and start serving our API. And that's actually all it takes to Dockerize your app. You can build the container locally by running docker build and then use the T flag to give it a tag name that you can reference easily. Now, after it finishes building, you can then run the container with docker run, reference that same tag, and then make sure to forward the port of 3333 to whatever port you want to use on your local system. We'll just go ahead and use the same port. So if you now visit localhost 3333, you should still be able to access your API, or you can do that in Insomnia. Now, when you run your container locally, you'll also need to set your environment variables, which you can do in the docker run command. So just keep that in mind, because without these environment variables, like the Stripe secret key, your API is not going to work. Now at this point, I'm assuming everything is good to go, and we're ready to deploy to production. The first thing we'll want to do is register this container in the cloud. We'll be doing that on the Google Cloud Container Registry. To do this from the command line, you'll need to have the gcloud SDK installed on your system. You can then set your local project to the project that you're using in Firebase. You can then use gcloud build submit to submit your Docker container to the cloud. That'll take a few minutes to build and upload, and then if you go to the console to container registry, you should see your Stripe server there. The next step is to find Cloud Run on the GCP console. Cloud Run is a service that allows us to run a container in a serverless environment. In a nutshell, this means we can run our backend code in a way that will scale infinitely and automatically without any effort on our part. On the Cloud Run page, we'll go ahead and create a new service, and we'll make sure to allow unauthenticated requests to this endpoint. Then we can click Next, and we'll point the service to the container that we uploaded. We also need to go into the advanced settings and set environment variables for the different variables that we need in our application. These are the same values that we set in the .env file in development. So we have things like the Stripe secret key, the Stripe webhook verification key, and the front-end web app URL. You can leave out the Google application credentials because this is a Google Cloud service. That variable will be there automatically for you. Now go ahead and click the button to create the service. And now your backend API is live. You'll see a URL up here at the top, and that's the equivalent to the localhost URL that you were using in development. So you can use that in your React app to access the API in production. In fact, we can go into the helpers file in the React app, and we'll change the value of the API variable to use this Cloud Run URL instead. The full stack application should work just like it did when you were developing locally. If you run into any problems at this point, you can go to the Cloud Run logs, and that will show you the server-side logs so you can debug any issues that are occurring on the server.